Hi, I'm Mike Beliveau, and today we're back at Duelist Den, and we're going to be taking a look at one of the most iconic firearms of the American West, the Winchester Model 1873 rifle. Now this is a replica made by Roberti, and it's a beautiful one. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history of this gun, but my main purpose today is going to be to answer a question I get very often from viewers, which is, why wasn't this gun chambered in .45 Colt during the 19th century? And the answer has a lot to do with cartridge case design, but we'll get to that in just a minute. We'll just talk a little bit more about the history of this gun and the mechanics, how it operates. We'll probably do a little bit of shooting, and I will hopefully answer that question to everybody's satisfaction. So let's take a look at Winchester's phenomenal Model 1873 rifle. So the Winchester's often been called the gun that won the West. Of course, there's a lot of guns that are called the gun that won the West. And I don't know if it can really get credit for that. But Winchester sold a heck of a lot of these things. I mean, these were great sellers. Winchester sold over the course of the production run, and this gun was in production from 1873 until 1919. And Winchester sold over 720,000 Model 1873s. And that's a pretty good run. They sold more of its replacement, which was the Model 1892, designed by John Browning. They sold over 1 million of those. But to be honest with you, there were a lot of years when this was available with the 92 head-to-head, and the 1873 outsold the 92. The 92 was in production until 1942, and that's a big help as far as getting its numbers up, because by then it was an incredibly popular gun in the movies. And you know, there's a saying in SAS that John Wayne can do no wrong, and since John Wayne used a Model 1892 Winchester in movies that showed everything just about from the Revolutionary War up until World War II, you know, you got to assume that the Model 92 was the gun that won the real West, R-E-E-L, as in film reel. But when it comes to the R-E-A-L, real life West, where people lived, the Model 1873 was a big part of settling the plains. So let's talk about this. This gun is the lineal descendant of the Henry rifle. And the Henry rifle is characterized by a toggle link action. And I'm going to show you what that looks like inside of the 73. Alright, so these linkages move. You can see the rounds in the magazine. They come back together. Right, the elevator goes up. The linkages move and allow the bolt to go in. And voila, I'll just close that. So that is how a Winchester toggle link action works. Now, there's no actual locking mechanism, but it's in battery when the links are straight out like that. And actually, it can resist a lot of pressure. The problem they had with the Henrys and with the 1866s is you might fire it before it's all the way in battery, like that. And if that happened, that bolt was coming back at you. So they installed, you can see it better here, they installed a lever actuated safety, right, that keeps you from firing before you're fully in battery. Now I'm going to be honest, I took it out on here because it was too stiff. And a lot of people did that. So I just have to be careful that I lever it all the way shut. But that's a look at the toggle link action and how it works. So this action basically is the same action used in the Henry in the 1866, the 1873, and the massive 1876, which was not a big success compared to the 73 certainly. And that action really is what started the magazine-fed repeater revolution in rifles, right? because the gun uses a tubular magazine, and the Henry and the 66 did the same thing. And it can be shot many times just by operating the lever, right? So just a phenomenal revolution from the single shot rifles that predominated up until the time the Henry came in. And even though the Spencer was another lever action that was fairly successful in the military, it never really caught on with civilians. For that, the Henry and then the Winchester absolutely dominated, and just a great gun. So these guns were chambered in 4440, 3840, and 3220 for the most part. About 19,000 of them were made in 22 rimfire. So the rest of the 720 were made in those other three calibers, the 3220, 3840, and 4440. With the 4440 being the most produced by far, then the 3840 and the 3220. So this gun, of course, is 4440, and this is the sporting rifle configuration. This would have been a little bit nicer than you would have gotten probably in your typical 1873, which I'll show you a little bit later. This one is chambered in 4440, right, just like most of them were. So the question I get asked all the time is, today, in the replicas, we have them chambered in 45 Colt, which is an extremely popular chambering with cowboy action shooters, because they would prefer to shoot 45 Colt than 4440, generally because it's easier for them to reload. 4440 is a snap to reload once you learn the tricks, but a lot of people fail miserably and don't ever learn the tricks to doing it easily. And you end up with a lot of crumpled cases, that sort of thing. Now, so they ask me, you know, if we've got 45 Colt today in the 1873, why didn't we have it in the 19th century? It would seem to make sense. Very powerful 45 caliber cartridge. Already has a great companion pistol that was extremely successful. So why did things go the other way, right? Why was Colt forced to chamber its single action army in 4440, like this one is, to be a companion piece, rather than Winchester go with 45 Colt? And in fact, you know there has to be a reason for that, because even Colt's own rifles, whether it's the Lightning Pump or the Burgess lever action that Colt introduced themselves, those rifles were not chambered in 45 Colt either. They were chambered in 4440. 44 Winchester centerfire is the actual designation of the cartridge. It got changed colloquially to 4440 because people didn't like giving Winchester the advertising by calling it the 44 Winchester centerfire. So they wanted to come up with a different name, but they certainly wanted to use the cartridge because it was so universally popular. Okay, so what's the reason? I'm going to tell you right now, even though it may it may mean you tune off of the video right after I tell you, but the reason is because of the cartridge case for the 45 Colt in the 19th century. Now, personally, I did not have a 19th century Colt cartridge around to show you. However, fellow gun writer and buddy of mine, Mike Venturino, does have some. And if you don't know who Mike Venturino is, or Duke Venturino, as his nickname is the Duke, if you don't know Mike, you should. He's a couple of years older than me. He is by far the dean of Old West firearms writing. He wrote for Guns and Ammo, he wrote for Shooting Times, he wrote for Hand Loader, American Rifleman. He's written for everything. He's written well over 1,000 articles, and he was already established when I was getting started as a writer. And since we had the same beat, I kind of became known as the other Mike, because we actually look a little bit similar. Anyway, Mike is a great guy, so I got a hold of him and I asked him if he would grab one of his 19th century cartridges and measure the rim for me, which he did. because the reason .45 Colt was not used in lever action rifles, or any kind of rifle really, is because the rims were tiny in the 19th century. Absolutely tiny. And in fact, you know, Mike measured a very early .45 Colt cartridge for me, and the rim is only projects from the body of the cartridge case about 1/100th of an inch. Actually, a little less than that. Like 9.5 thousandths of an inch. Okay, so 1/100th of an inch. Not much. Not enough for the extractor to claw onto, to grab it, to pull it out. And also, those early Colt cases were made out of copper, quite soft. So as they heated up, and this of course was a problem in 45-70 single shot as well for the military. You know, you see the Battle of Little Bighorn, where extractors were tearing right through those cartridges when they heated up and stuck to the chambers. You would have gotten the same thing in .45 Colt, but the extractor really would have had nothing to grab onto. Those rims are so small that their whole purpose is just to stop it from sliding right through the revolver chambers, right? Just to give you some stop on that. So, I mean, you might logically ask, well, if that's the case, how do they get them to work in the 20th century with .45 Colt? And the answer is, they changed the cartridge. So the 19th century .45 Colt has a rim that projects 1/100th of an inch beyond the body of the case. A 20th and 21st century .45 Colt has a rim that projects 1.5 hundredths of an inch. So it's 50% larger. But not only that, they machined a cannulure, a groove, right above the rim. And that gives more room for the extractor to dig in. So there's actually enough room to get them in and out. And because it's not a balloon-headed copper case, right, because now it's a brass case with a solid head, they don't tear out. So they became a pretty popular way to go, particularly with cowboy action shooters. Now, despite the fact that smart engineers managed to get a big enough rim for an extractor to grab on a .45 Colt, I've got to tell you, it's still pretty marginal. If you take a look at this picture, you can see that original .45 Colt, which is, you know, barely 1/100th of an inch. Right next to it is a 4440, and the rim on that is twice as wide, 0.0225 inches, as the original .45 Colt, and it's pretty much a 1/100th of an inch bigger than the modern .45 Colt. Now, I'm going to tell you, I have guns chambered for both, and we're going to shoot them today. But I think the 4440 is a much better cartridge for lever action guns, particularly with black powder. And I think that's why, of course, it was so popular during the 19th century. And the reason I say that is because the 4440 has a slightly bottlenecked case. And that allows it, when you lever it, right? Of course, these guns, 73s, feed with an elevator that brings it straight up. So the cartridge is aligned with the chamber, which is a good thing. But by having that bottlenecked cartridge, so the bullet is a 44 caliber, and the actual cartridge base itself is more like 48 caliber. Right? It's got plenty of room to start into the chamber without hanging up, which is great. Because on my .45 Colt 1873, when I first got it, .45 Colt cartridges used to hang up on the chamber mouth all the time. I'd get the crimp hitting the edge of the chamber, which was really too sharp, and just jam in there. So I had a gunsmith chamfer my chamber mouth so I could get a smoother entry to it, which solved that problem. But you don't have that problem at all with a bottleneck cartridge. The other benefit the 4440s have is the case mouth the brass is thinner than the case mouth of a .45 Colt. What that means is when you fire it, it fire forms to the chamber better than a .45 Colt cartridge does. So it seals it so you don't get blowback of any gas and fouling into the action. It's phenomenal. Now you can get the same results with a .45 Colt, but a lot of people don't because they like to use light bullets and light powder charges, even with black powder, and you simply can't get enough pressure to fire form the mouth of that case as tightly to the chamber if you do that. So you get blowback into the action, which means you got fouling to clean up in there because it's going to rust, right? Now the way I load .45 Colt with black powder, when I use them with lever action rifle or with anything, because I load the same for everything, is I load 255 grain bullets, a heavy bullet. If you use a 200 grain bullet, you just can't get the same pressure. I use a 255 grain bullet, and I use about a 35 grain powder charge. And that provides enough pressure to seal that case pretty well. Not as well as a 4440, but pretty well. Okay, and while I'm on the subject, a lot of people will tell you that the load for, you know, .45 Colt in the 19th century was 40 grains of black powder, 2F or 3F. Most of them I've seen use 2F, but 40 grains of black powder and a 255 grain bullet. And there are civilian loads that are that high. You can only do it in a balloon head case. In a solid head case, it can be done. I've done it, but it requires a compression die to really compress that powder so you can get the bullet in, because there's just not enough room in the case. But the military pretty quickly went to a 30 grain powder charge and a 250 grain bullet. And that is really the standard Colt load. And they found that that was easier to control, recoil-wise, gave plenty of power, and did the job. So you might want to think about that when you're loading them yourself. But that's not a great load for the rifle, as far as sealing the chamber against any blowback into the action. But it's all trade-offs, right? So that's the answer in a nutshell. If you want to tune out now, that's fine, but I'm going to do a little shooting because I'm out here at Duelist Den, and it's a crisp fall day, and seems like a perfect time to exercise the rifles a little bit. Well, I've got my standard 1873 rifle, and it is loaded with .45 Colt cartridges, and these are my hand loads. So I'm basically using the Skeeter Skelton load, which is 7.8 grains of unique and a 255 grain bullet. So let's go see if we can tickle Evil Roy's fancy. Oh, that was it. I should have counted 5 shots. And I think Evil Roy has got his comeuppance. Well, I don't want to feel left out, so I'm going to take my 1873 sporting rifle in 4440, and I'm going to shoot it at Evil Roy too, because why shouldn't it have some fun? Got him. All right. Well, I've got some clay birds set up about 40 yards downrange. Let's see if I can take them out with the sporting rifle. 4 for 4. I'll take that. Well, I've got a few more clay birds set up on my old buddy Hans Up. So let's see if I can bust those as well. One. Two. Ah, I missed them. There we go. Got him. Oh, I hate to miss. Let's tickle the plates at Swing City before we go. I'm going to start off with the 45 Colt. Whoa. I think my sights are a little bit off on this gun. I seem to be shooting a little bit to the left, but still fun. Now let's tickle the plates with the 4440. All right, that was fun. So, my final thoughts on the subject. Modern cartridge case design has allowed us to use the 45 Colt in lever action rifles, and that can be a real boon for people who want to have a companion piece and already have a 45 Colt 6 gun, and I think that's great. Now personally, I still think that the 4440 is a better rifle round, and that if you're going to make the choice to have companion arms in the same caliber, I would go 4440 all the way. But that's just me. And to be honest with you, you can go 45 and you can have a great time, and that's what it's all about. So either way, they're good guns. But I hope that answers the question of why 19th century Winchesters weren't chambered for 45 Colt and why they are today. So that's it for now. I'll see you next week. Bye.